Hi, folks. We're all faced with a lot of reading. History, generally speaking, has been a reading intensive discipline, but particularly now we're in hybrid where teachers aren't talking at you as much. Reading is a very effective tool and it's a life skill. So that if you're a struggling reader right now, or you find like you read and you just can't remember what you're doing, we probably need to come up with a better way to read. I mean, you know how to make words into sounds and sounds into ideas, but sometimes it seems like the reading just pours over us like water on a rock. Remember, when we talk about writing, which is kind of the inverse process of reading, we're told that we need to write with a purpose. Writers have to have a purpose, a clear focus. It's not just about putting words together. So it's the same true with reading. Now, what I'm going to show you right now is a skill that's going to help you read. Now, you'll have to apply this skill, but it's going to help you so that you don't have to read something 3 or 4 or 5 times to get something from it. I fear that some of us are just like trying to scan the reading and trying to plug answers in because we don't feel comfortable with reading. Others, we read the whole thing and it's like our minds are somewhere else. We're done. And all we know about our reading is we're done. So we're going to use this skill set. This is going to really help you so that in the next couple of readings that we'll do, we'll quiz you on the reading rather than have written answers. And I want you to be sure that you follow this skill set to see if you could become a better reader. You could comprehend more. The skill is called SQ3R. S stands for scan, then Q is to question, that is why you're reading it, and then you read it, then you recite what you learn, and then later you review it and it makes it part of what you know. Because you know everything you experience and what you learn rewires your brain. It's something you should be able to pull out anytime, not just for a test. I really want you to own what you learn in history and to know history rather than just getting a passing history grade. So let's try this SQ3R out. Let me just review the things first, and then we're going to try to model it on a reading assignment that we have coming up on the election of 1864. So the first thing we do is we need to scan it. That is, you kind of get an idea. How long is the reading? What's the reading about? What are the pictures and captions show me? By scanning over the reading, you should have a general idea of what you're reading about. That is, are we reading about how to put together a bicycle? Are we reading a novel or a story? Are we reading something about biology? Because that will lead us to the second step, which is question. I think this is where you really could spend some time and make sure that you read with a purpose. When you read something, a lot of times you just say, well, this is assigned, I have to read it. Well, if that's your purpose, then you'll read it. But if you have a clearer purpose, like if you could get an idea of generally what you're supposed to learn, you'll find that the material will stick with you more. And isn't that what you want? You don't want to have to read it 6 times. Wouldn't it be nice if you read and that all that stuff just had a place in your brain and stuck to you? So in essence, we're trying to make your brain sticky. So things don't just roll off it, but they stick there like sticky notes. And then you could pull them out and you could connect them. Then the next obvious thing is read. But when you read, you have to not just look at words, you have to keep looking at your purpose. Are you learning what you hope to learn? Are you connecting? At every paragraph, does the main idea make sense? Are the supporting facts connecting? And when you do that, because reading is not passive, it's not just looking at words. You have to interact with the reading, just like writing is not passive. You have to engage the text rather than just look at it. And then the next issue is recite it. So when you're done, you look back at your purpose and say, what have I learned from this reading? What are some things I know? And then you go back and scan it again to review and say, okay, this is what I've learned. I've changed, meaning that every time that you really successfully learn something, you change yourself in a small way. You change what you know, what you understand. So let's apply this to a reading I have here that we're going to do on the election of 1864. So we got to scan it first. So before I start reading this, I want to scan it. So I want to pay attention to a couple of things as I scan it. It's on the election of 1864, and as I'm thinking about, the election of 1864, we looked at the election of 1860, we're looking at the Civil War right now, and we just had an election. Those triggers should be in your brain. It connects you to the reading. So we know we're looking at an election, we're looking at a president, we're looking at Lincoln, we've studied that. And I have an overview which is going to help you guys to look at this. While we now consider Abraham Lincoln as among America's greatest presidents, he had great reason to doubt that he would be reelected in the election of 1864, as the nation was in the grips of what seemed to be an endless civil war. Okay, so we've studied the Civil War. We know it was becoming brutal and destructive. And we looked at Lincoln in 1860. So, it's hard for us today to think of Lincoln as, somebody who was marginal in 1864. I mean, the guy's got a monument and cities named after him. That wasn't apparent in 1860. Now, there's some key questions too, because if I look at these key questions now, that will help me come up with my purpose of reading. Now, a lot of times the readings are at the end of the section, not the beginning. I put them here at the beginning purposely this time so that you can think about them as you read, so you don't have to go back to them. How was the continuation of the war hurting Lincoln's chances to being reelected? Well, it seems like the war was a problem. How did the election of 1864 present some hope in the seceding states that they could end the war with their independence intact? Think and remember that the Civil War, the southern states wanted their independence. Then the third piece is we're looking at how was Lincoln able to manage to get reelected? So we did a spoiler alert there. And what was Lincoln's plan revealed in his second inaugural address? Remember, presidents make inaugural addresses after they're elected. So let's move ahead. So you got a picture of a torchlit parade for George McClellan, the Democratic nominee for president. It's in New York City, 1864. And you remember McClellan was the general that Lincoln had canned in 1862. We have the electoral map. We're pretty familiar with those electoral maps. We've looked at it from 2020, and we looked at it in 1860. You can see the Republican Party still seems to have a control in the North pretty strongly. You got the popular vote listed right there too. So we have a picture of a campaign poster. We read about a split in the Democratic Party. So I'm scanning through here. I see there's a video that I'll need to watch too that will help me understand this. So I see that in blue. I know I have a video. That's a hyperlink. And then I get this little indent thing right here, which appears to be when you indent something like that, it's a primary source. It's a small part of a speech. And that's all we have to do. So now let's move again to the top. Now we have come up with our scan. The scan should take you maybe 2 minutes. Now, after I've scanned this, I know my purpose of reading is I'm going to find out about the election of 1864, why it was a tough time for Lincoln, but how he was able to win the election. And then we look at it and how he began his second term in his inaugural address. So when I read this, I'm going to find out about Lincoln wanting, about the problem Lincoln had in getting reelected, how he was reelected. So as I read the paragraphs, I'm going to move ahead here. It is hard for modern Americans to believe that Abraham Lincoln, one of the history's most beloved presidents, was nearly defeated in his reelection attempt in 1864. Yet by that summer, Lincoln himself had feared he would lose. How could this happen? First, the country had not elected an incumbent president for a second term since Andrew Jackson in 1832. 9 presidents in a row had served just one term. Also, his embrace of the emancipation still proved to be a problem for many Northern voters. We read that the other day. So you should say, oh yeah, Emancipation Proclamation, not universally loved in the North. Despite Union victories in Gettysburg and Vicksburg a year earlier, the Southern armies came back fighting with a vengeance. During 3 months in the summer of 1864, over 65,000 Union soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing in action. In comparison, there had been 108,000 Union casualties in the first 3 years. General Ulysses S. Grant was being called the Butcher. At one time during the summer, Confederate soldiers under Jubal Early came within 5 miles of the White House. There's my electoral map right there. Lincoln had much to contend with. He had staunch opponents in Congress, and the underground Confederate activities brought rebellion to parts of Maryland. Lincoln's suspension of the writ of habeas corpus was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Justice Robert B. Taney, remember him, an order Lincoln refused to obey. But worst of all, the war was not going well. Okay, so we could stop there for a second. I'm going to have you read the rest of this on your own. But take a look. Lincoln, the war wasn't going well. A lot of people were dying. So this gives us some ideas as to why Lincoln was going to have a tough time trying to get reelected. So what I'm going to do at this point is, if I could stop this.